Do you know how many Oscars I've won? Do you know how many Golden Globes I've won? And I'd be like, gee, Harvey, do you know how many Boy Scout merit badges I have and an Emmy?
Harvey he's a tough, tough guy with incredible taste.
He's a maverick.
He is absolutely 100% in that big Hollywood mogul tradition.
A modern showmanship, in a way, almost a little touch of the sensationalism of DeMille.
I'd say 50% genius, 50% asshole.
I would think that the movie-making world would be a less interesting place if he's not a player in it.
Something like a Terminator, ain't no equivocating. I fight for what I believe. Why you talking about it? Just talking about it. Some calling me a sinner, some calling me a winner. I'm calling you to dinner, and you know exactly what I mean. Yeah, I'm talking about you. You can rock or you can leave. Watch me tip without you. No, no, no. Whether you're high or low, or whether you're high or low, you got to tip on the tightrope. Now let me see you do the tightrope, and I'm still tipping. Walking on it, or trying to run around it. This ain't no acrobatics. You either follow or you lead. Yeah, I'm talking about you. Or keep on blaming the machine. Yeah, I'm talking about it. Talking about it. I can't complain about it. I gotta keep my balance and just keep dancing on it. We getting funky on the scene, and you know about it. Like a star on the screen. Watch me tip all on it, and I'm still tipping on it.
How do you make a film about a person when there have been very few more determined to control their own image and the final cut than Harvey Weinstein? His career has been totally reliant on exposure, and yet Harvey rejected an invitation to be interviewed for this film and discouraged many others to participate. That's understandable, as not every film has a happy ending. He was a self-described outsider that would go from a penniless dreamer to one of Hollywood's most iconoclastic characters. His fantasies would become reality by exercising an infamous recipe of charm, brilliance, and manipulation, all fueled by the soul of an artist and a tyrant. He would become a political insider, publisher, Broadway producer, and teach a new generation to talk, fight, and even dance. He would become one of Hollywood's most controversial producers and grab an unprecedented 300 Oscar nominations and over 67 Academy Awards. He defined an era that would never repeat itself. Welcome to the extraordinary world of Harvey Weinstein.
The big stuff. Who do you think you are? Mr. Big Stuff. You're never gonna get my love.
Long before Harvey Weinstein would dominate Hollywood on both coasts and anoint himself the fucking sheriff of New York, he was a dreamer looking to escape what could have been a dreary future. Together with his younger brother Bob, Harvey would build a major film studio and distribute and produce some of Hollywood's most memorable films, as well as some costly disappointments.
If you look at his early life and you look at his career, there's a very powerful force that is looking for respectability, for acceptance. And winning Oscars is one way to get it, isn't it?
He came from not the typical Hollywood background. He didn't look the Hollywood type. Initially, he didn't make the Hollywood movie, and he revolutionized the industry.
It wasn't just that the movie made money at the box office. It wasn't just that the movie was good. He needed awards. And I suppose that goes to some kind of affirmation of the guy hanging on the ledge as a youth in Queens.
I'm one of those kids from Brooklyn and Queens who used to watch the Oscars and root and cheer, and I just wanted to dedicate this to all those kids out there and tell them to break the rules.
Harvey grew up as the son of a somewhat melancholy father named Max, who was a diamond cutter in the famed jewelry district on 47th Street in New York City. Max Weinstein struggled to make a living due to health setbacks, preventing him from giving his family everything he wanted. But he taught Harvey a valuable lesson that would pay off later in life: the art of presentation.
As somebody said, you know, you go into one of those stores, there's so many diamonds, one diamond looks like another, but if you take a diamond and display it correctly, it becomes the only diamond that you're looking at. And that's what Harvey did with his movies. He displayed them on a black felt cushion in exactly the right way. So he distinguished them from all the other independent film traffic.
After returning from the Second World War, Max Weinstein married Miriam Postel from Brooklyn. Their two sons, Harvey and Bob, were 2 years apart, and Miriam imbued them with the American dream of wealth and social status. They grew up in a 6-story rent-controlled housing development in Flushing, Queens.
I visited the Queens home where he was born with him, actually. We drove out there. It was kind of a low-rise, high-rise. I mean, it was like public housing, and all these memories of growing up flooded back to him as we walked and drove and talked about it. And he felt that he and his brother, Bob, grew up in hard times.
On Saturdays, Max would take his boys to the movies at the Mayfair Theater, a local art house located 2 miles from their apartment. He exposed the artistic side of Harvey with evocative foreign films by directors such as Fellini, Visconti, and Rossellini. It would be a film by Francois Truffaut that Harvey claimed had an influential impact on him. The film was the iconic 400 Blows, and at the age of 14 years old, thinking it was a pornographic film, Harvey took his younger brother and 6 friends to see the film, hoping to see some flesh. When the lights came up, Harvey and Bob were the only ones left in the theater. Aside from being mesmerized by the film, the provocative title 400 Blows had been a prophetic marketing lesson for Harvey.
You wouldn't hear what you heard from Harvey about marketing a film that came from his gut, it came from instinct, from any other distributor.
He actually brought people into theaters to see movies that they wouldn't normally have seen, and probably in some ways changed their lives.
In 1969, the same year Max Weinstein had supported Norman Mailer for mayor, Harvey left New York City to attend the University of Buffalo.
It was either Buffalo or Vietnam, and Buffalo was much nicer than Vietnam, so we went to the University of Buffalo together.
Within months, he would begin his career as a concert promoter by bringing music acts to Buffalo. He would develop cutthroat booking tactics that many would claim set the foundation for his forceful techniques as an emerging movie mogul.
If he feels that there's opportunity, he's going to pursue it, and he's going to pursue it in the way he does, full throttle.
He would eliminate any competition at the university and eclipse the other promoters by persuading Stephen Stills to come to Buffalo. With a string of successes, he started a concert company with his classmate Corky Burger. 5 years later, the company Harvey and Corky Presents was producing 2,000 concerts a year.
Out of the blue, he came up and he said that he was producing a Grateful Dead concert. I mean, he scooped everybody and blew everybody away, because there were other concert promoters that were established at the time, and then bringing the Dead to Buffalo raised everything like 10 clicks.
With the concert business exploding, Harvey dropped out of college and acquired a rundown 2,000-seat theater called The Century. He used the theater for concerts and played movies on Saturday night. His brother Bob invented the formula of showing 3 movies for the price of 1. Harvey was barely 20 years old. In 1979, intrigued by the film business, Harvey sold his shares in the concert company and moved back to New York City to start a film company with his brother Bob. They called it Miramax, after their parents Miriam and Max.
Miramax's charter was always to make something new and different, almost like Star Trek, to boldly go where no one had gone before.
I'm back, back in the New York groove. I'm back, back in the New York groove.
It had been over a decade since Easy Rider exploded on screens, followed by a new wave of films featuring indie and breakthrough directors such as Bob Rafelson, Peter Bogdanovich, Mike Nichols, Stanley Kubrick, and Francis Ford Coppola. It was a movement that came to be known as the New Hollywood.
For once, man will have a godlike control over his own destiny.
All that changed at the end of the 70s, you know, in the wake of the big blockbusters, you know, Jaws, Star Wars, Close Encounters, E.T., the studios regained their footing, and suddenly they kicked all these guys out.
The 1980s would give birth to the blockbuster phenomenon, replacing story-driven films like Kramer vs. Kramer, Apocalypse Now, and Raging Bull.
That was the point at which Redford started Sundance to help these filmmakers. These are where the exciting voices are in, you know, the personal voices, the political voices in American cinema, and they're not getting a chance to make their movies.
It keeps alive the idea of diversity, which means we have the opportunity to see more individual stories with personal visions attached to them, more regional filmmaking. The independent filmmaker's greatest problem is in distribution and exhibition.
So the whole idea of Sundance was kind of to meld the independent voice with a Hollywood technique and to make these movies commercially appealing.
25 years after Easy Rider, there was this kind of new wave of films that were beginning to break through, and there was clearly an audience demand for them.
But none of them were able to break the $25 million barrier, and they were still pretty much ghettoized in art theaters.
Before they came along, independent film was a very controlled, careful environment, very, very modest sums being spent on marketing. And the Weinstein brothers kind of blew that up. They really supercharged independent distribution.
It was just like, you know, my brother and I are going to make movies and millions of people are going to watch them and they're going to win Oscars. And it's kind of, you know, in a town where that's just not how it works. And he wasn't even in the town.
The whole history of the Hollywood film industry is a history of outsiders coming in and defeating Edison, who tried to build a film industry in New Jersey, but he wouldn't allow Jews into it. And so Hollywood was invented, and Hollywood has always been a changing process, and Harvey probably changed it as much as any other film mogul in history.
It was a two-bedroom apartment on Broadway and 56th. Harvey in one bedroom, Bob in the other, and 3 or 4 of us in the living room.
It was a grimy, fluorescent-lit, drop ceiling, small space with the desks all kind of like piled right next to each other.
Harvey's office was actually really small. He just had this room, this little sort of sweat box. And it had a small couch facing the desk, and that's what there was. And Harvey's big, but in that room, he looked really big.
Harvey had hired Eve Chilton as his assistant. And we would come into the office, and every day there'd be like a pile of roses or some bouquet of flowers, and he was, you know, wooing his assistant. And we had to tell him to stop. You know, it was like distracting. We couldn't get our job done.
Harvey had become smitten with a new employee at Miramax. Eve Chilton was socially prominent and absolutely stunning. She would go from being Harvey's secretary to his wife in less than a year, and together they would have 3 daughters. At the age of 52, Harvey's father died of a heart attack. Harvey kept Max's memory alive by installing his mother Miriam as the fledgling company's first receptionist.
She'd come at the Jewish holidays and bring, you know, rugelach and
Cakes and candies, and always in a great mood and happy, and you couldn't imagine that this woman was their mother.
The other cornerstone of Miramax was Harvey's brother, the less flamboyant Bob, who preferred to remain behind the scenes.
to get a film either financed here or acquired at Miramax. It's really a case of me and my brother.
The role of Bob in the company should never, ever be overlooked. I mean, you know, Bob is obviously a very different personality than Harvey. I mean, he's really in the background. You hardly ever hear his name.
Nobody inspires me more than my brother Bob, who is my partner and best friend every day.
Bob has just always been an incredibly smart business force. I mean, the guy, he's like Rain Man when it comes to numbers.
Harvey is ego, whereas Bob is greed in its most base human drive.
You know, Bob is the business guy and Harvey's the creative guy. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that. Without each other, they would never have found the success individually that they found together.
Based on his approval, my approval, and that was it. There was no 3 weeks, hold on, we've got to go up through the corporate board meeting. That's what we like.
Harvey went back to his roots and distributed a few concert films, including Paul McCartney's Rock Show, before acquiring The Secret Policeman's Ball. He recut the film and combined it with its sequel, The Secret Policeman's Other Ball. To market the film and to get attention, Harvey developed a mock TV spot featuring a Monty Python character.
I'm from the oral majority. I wish to complain strongly about this disgusting new comedy movie, The Secret Policeman's Other Ball. Should we allow Peter Cook and members of Monty Python to interfere with pregnant women and carry on with semi-naked wenches? I say no. This movie must be banned before it turns us all into weirdos. Thank you.
The spot aired on Saturday Night Live in 1982, and the film grossed $6 million on a budget of just $120,000. While looking for films to distribute, Harvey produced his first feature film called The Burning. It was a cheap Friday the 13th knockoff that was followed by Harvey's directorial debut, Playing for Keeps.
It's about these smart, street tough kids from Queens who want to open, of all things, a rock and roll hotel in the Catskills.
Is there a vacancy?
And they raise money for the hotel by selling Girl Scout cookies. I mean, nobody has seen this movie, and nobody really should.
The year was 1986, and Miramax desperately needed a hit. The company had 20 employees and was barely staying alive.
Twist and Shout, the Billy August film, went on to gross like $1.5 million. And that was at least double any box office that they'd had before. And it was really the first film that was nationally released and was a huge success for the company.
You're a whore.
I just hate that word. Working girl is better.
The very next film was Working Girls. And Working Girls, long story short, grossed over $2 million. And with the success of those two films, they were literally able to take 2 notebooks full of rave reviews and features from newspapers all over the country to the bank and raise their first equity financing.
Harvey sold 45% of Miramax for $3.5 million to the British bank Midland Montague and secured a $10 million line of credit. The cash infusion not only saved the company, but gave Harvey the power to aggressively start buying and distributing films.
Harvey and Bob shook the system up in a significant way. It was a relatively secure, stable group of people who were buying and selling films for not a lot of money. And Harvey was, the street fighter, the guy who'd come out of the rock and roll business. And he kind of just got in there and got his hands very, very dirty.
I made a film called I've Heard the Mermaids Singing in 1987, and it was accepted into Cannes. And I started getting phone calls from this guy in New York, like, you gotta let me buy your film. You're gonna get swamped. If you don't sell it before you get to Cannes, it's gonna be a disaster. And then once we were in Cannes with the film, everywhere I'd went, I'd get like, ma'am, there's a bottle of Dom Perignon from this guy over here. It's like, there was Harvey, and I just thought he was such a maniacal force about buying it. He's gonna be that same man with the exhibitors. He's gonna be that same with the publicists. He's just gonna push it.
The essential marketing strategy of art and independent movies at that time. You would take out a small ad in the newspaper on the weekend, you'd put it into a theater, and it would sit there in the hopes that somebody might stumble upon it, like it, and tell a friend, and they'd come and see it. When Harvey came along, that all changed.
What Harvey did brilliantly better than anybody would just find the most
common denominator element in a movie that should have just been for 20 people and make it for millions of people. Find the thing that makes people jump out of their seats and go to the theater. Remember, these guys were concert promoters, right? What was their job every week? Fill the seats. And they remembered it beautifully.
Another early Miramax strategy was to generate controversy by deliberately using an X rating. For films like Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, and The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover.
Attention is what the independents try to get. Free attention rather than spending massive amounts on advertising.
That sentiment echoes suggestion that Miramax may be using the media publicity from the X ratings to promote its films.
The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. It was all about the X rating. It was all engineered. It was controversy. The day that film got its X rating, we were on Entertainment Tonight, like all of these really mainstream entities.
This is the latest battle in the war between Miramax and the MPAA, which has slapped X ratings on a string of Miramax films.
Harvey also repositioned Scandal, a film based on a salacious political sex scandal in the UK. He cleverly released it with an X rating on a record 400 screens for Miramax. The film would gross $8 million.
They were never shy of controversy, shy of doing what was kind of outrageous or pushing the envelope, and expose a broader swath of people to it outside of just the independent film fans.
Tu qua non ci devi venire. Ma come te lo devo fare capire? Se può sapere come hai a parlare. Se prende fuoco la pellicola, a come sei piccolo tu, fai una pampata sola, boom!
E diventa un pezzo di carbone.
While successfully building a track record marketing indie films, Harvey also started to focus on foreign movies. He struck gold with Cinema Paradiso, releasing it to North American audiences with huge success.
In the late 70s, early 80s, there appeared to be an aversion to seeing films with subtitles. And it was really damaging, I think, for American culture, not to have this infusion of other cultures through cinema. And so with Cinema Paradiso and other films during that period, they changed it completely.
Time Magazine, The Village Voice, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Seattle Times all call Pele the Conqueror one of the 10 best films of the year.
When Harvey got his first Oscar nomination, Best Foreign Film for Pele the Conqueror, and then a Best Actor nomination for Max von Sydow. Miramax was a zero at that point, and people were astounded and felt it couldn't be done.
The next year, Miramax picked up 2 more Oscars with the unlikely hit My Left Foot, which won Best Supporting Actress and Best Actor for Daniel Day-Lewis.
I think that people want to see these films. Now, they might not have big stars in them, but I think what's happening is the story is the king. And when you tell a good story in an interesting and innovative way, audiences will come.
Success did not make Miramax a pleasant place to work. Harvey would become infamous for tearing phones out of walls and using anger as a tool. One former employee said that anything close by could be used as a weapon.
It was a very stressed out culture in the offices of Miramax, and people really worked very hard. They worked really long hours. It was routine that I would get phone calls at home, like on a Sunday night. Women in the publicity department, they were like walking ulcers. They just were always frazzled. There were frequent tears.
It was a yelling culture, a lot of loud voices, and some talented people, but also a lot of beaten down people.
Almost like dealing with an alcoholic patriarch. You're living in constant fear that you're going to get spanked or beaten or talked down to.
I came to work as Harvey Weinstein's second assistant in September of 1989. I quit my first week working there. I hated it. The office was tiny. The atmosphere was very, very intense. With his temperament, it was just impossible. Later on, he begged me to come back.
A lot of people couldn't stand it and left, but came back. And to some degree, it was almost like the Stockholm Syndrome, where you identified with your oppressor.
Pushing buttons is something Weinstein's famous for. Known as a controversial figure in Hollywood, he's demanding and outspoken.
He was running his own show. So if you don't have that thing in an office where, well, you don't throw an ashtray because you'll get fired, or human resources is on line 1 because of your language, you make your own rules.
I'd never met him before, so the greatest part was in the hallway waiting, he would just fire some main high-ranking official of his company. Literally, that moment, went walking out, and I heard him screaming.
And he'd call me up in the middle of the night and say, "What the fuck are you doing? Why are you asleep? Why aren't you in the cutting room?"
He's liable to say anything when he gets worked up. He cools down. Luckily, he's had great people around him that are part of down Harvey, relax.
The you see in this guy Hollywood and, you know, these movies that people make with superheroes bouncing around off the walls. And you're right, what that is.
Well, I told him to take that he needed anger management, because ultimately what happens with Harvey is that he gets to a place where he blew up, and then he'd feel badly and he'd feel terrible.
He would always say to me, I have anger management issues, but I've dealt with it. I've solved it. He'd always been saying that.
His theme is, I've mellowed. I got my blood sugar under control. If you type in mellowed and Harvey Weinstein, your search engine will blow up. I'm a diabetic too, and I haven't threatened to poke somebody's eyes out in like 20 years.
In my estimation, an individual who is reputedly difficult to deal with is a far more attractive challenge than the secret way in which you're slain by committees.
Is the fact that he was tempestuous and yelled at people and was a bully, if he produces good movies, how much does it matter that he yelled?
Well, ain't you a picture?
What has been said of mousetraps also applies to movies. Make a better one and the world will beat a path to your door. No one knows the cliche better than 26-year-old Steven Soderbergh, whose Sex, Lies, and Videotape has Hollywood's big guys simpering like suitors on his doorstep.
In 1989, the breakout hit that Miramax so desperately wanted premiered at Sundance.
Back then, nobody was going to Sundance. It was just a cold place where you tried to introduce a no-name filmmaker to the one journalist who was in Sundance. And there was no sense that these films could have an international platform or that anything big time could come of it.
At first, Harvey's reputation made the producers and director Steven Soderbergh wary of dealing with Miramax, but they could not refuse his offer of a record acquisition fee of $1 million for a small indie film with unheard-of stars and a little-known director.
Nobody believed it. The other distributors thought he was crazy and thought it was going to bankrupt his company.
In May, the film won the Palme d'Or in Cannes, but the real goal was to get the film to cross over to a mainstream audience.
It's the most provocative film of the year.
Harvey would break indie film marketing rules again and spend an unheard of $2.5 million on a TV campaign, where in the past, indie films would rely on reviews or word of mouth.
The Los Angeles Times calls it brilliant, a delicate and sexually charged film.
He literally went to the audience and dragged them into the cinema. And it expanded past a few small art theaters into the suburbs, into the megaplexes.
Ultimately, Sex, Lies, and Videotape would gross over $54 million worldwide and drive the beginning of the 1990s independent film boom.
The following year, all sorts of international buyers showed up at Sundance. The following year, all sorts of journalists who theretofore refused to go came. So it was a turning point in so many ways for the industry. It wasn't just for Miramax.
Don't do it.
Harvey would follow Sex, Lies, and Videotape with one of the most talked about film marketing stories ever. The film was The Crying Game.
Harvey and Bob absolutely decided to act up the picture. And they were our first choice to do this because they have the undoubted nous to promote was actually quite a difficult film to promote.
It's a very slow-paced thriller with this budding romance between a straight guy and a transvestite.
It flopped in England. It was too out there and too transgressive.
Harvey brilliantly built his marketing campaign around the shocking plot twist in the film.
You did know, didn't you? Oh, my God. Jesus, I feel sick.
There are not many films that have that kind of revelation, that's sort of jaw-dropping surprise. And then that became, very quickly, the MO on the marketing of the film. Do not reveal the secret of the crying game.
What was really nice was the American media and critics, you know, went along with it.
I mean, he understood what he had. He had a totally unique idea in an unrecognizable genre. And he went all the way with that movie.
The Crying Game would gross $63 million and solidify Miramax's reputation as an indie film powerhouse.
Suddenly, these films weren't specialty films. They were films that could cross over, and sometimes in very, very big ways.
He was able to distribute them in such a way that so many people saw them, and they became just films, not independent films, films.
Don't go, say something!
Driven by his success, Harvey's hunger to dominate the indie film business turned to greed. Huge buying sprees and a slate of underperforming films had left Miramax weak and hurting for cash.
Even when the films did well, it's a very expensive business to run. I mean, you're always running faster to stay in place. So, although Harvey's always denied it, in 1992, 93, he had a string of disasters, and the company looked like it was going to go under.
As Hollywood counts down to its biggest event, the blurring line between independent and mainstream films is causing major studios to invest in independent companies. Independent used to mean small. Small budget, small distribution, small audience. No more. Independence is in Hollywood these days. That's how you become part of the establishment.
In 1992, while selling Disney a package of Miramax films, talent agent John Patak introduced Harvey to Disney's Jeff Katzenberg. Katzenberg was impressed with the phenomenal and rapid success Miramax had achieved.
10 years ago, Miramax didn't exist, and they have built it into an extraordinary home and haven for new, independent, foreign filmmaking talent.
Disney, to their credit, quickly realized that if you put the Miramax films through the Disney machine, in other words, took advantage of the Disney distribution, you could add a huge percentage of profit to every single film.
The one brand everyone knew about was the Disney brand for family fare, and the only other brand was Miramax for adult dramas. So it was a brilliant move when Jeff Katzenberg pushed Michael Eisner to pick up Miramax.
High-pressure negotiations began, and an offer was made that Harvey could not afford to refuse.
You know, we felt at that point that we had all the leverage. We knew they really didn't have any alternatives, so it was really a process over a 3-month period of kind of just waiting them out and wearing them down.
Buena Vista Pictures Distribution has entered into an agreement to acquire Miramax Film Corporation.
Disney paid $60 million for Miramax and gave Harvey and Bob lucrative contracts through 2005.
He really pulled one off. I mean, it's, you know, this is like pulling the chestnuts out of the fire.
Disney got a library of over 500 films and a pipeline for home video and TV, and Miramax got the financial power it wanted. The deal allowed Miramax to invest up to $20 million per picture and freedom to release what they wanted as long as it was not X-rated or NC-17. Harvey's master plan to build his fledgling studio into a powerhouse was underway.
I think it's the synergy. It's having, you know, the autonomy to make our kind of movies and to have their kind of resources.
The immediate effect of the Disney deal was the entire community going, what? Miramax working with Disney? How long will I give that? 6 months. That'll never work.
Disney and Miramax, that's not May, December. That's heaven and hell. These are very, very different organizations.
In the early days, Katzenberg and Harvey had some kind of strange affinity of opposites. And they gave Miramax a lot of autonomy, which was the only way it was going to work.
Harvey began a virtual arms race, picking up hit after hit.
When they got the money from Disney, they really were emboldened to then
really, really step up and just spend whatever money they thought necessary to, to hurt the competition and help themselves.
They had access to almost unlimited amounts of Disney money, and they could afford to not only buy every film they wanted, but to buy films they didn't want just to keep them away from other distributors. And it also enabled them to keep other distributors out of the choice theaters. I mean, essentially gave them a monopoly.
In some instances, I think he overpaid for a lot of product. And suddenly the numbers jumped up because Harvey was, going out there and spending more than they would spend.
As Harvey continued to drive up the prices of indie films, nothing would prepare the industry for the acquisition of a small film called Sling Blade.
Pleased to meet you.
There was actually a screening in New York and a screening in LA at the same time. Harvey was in Paris, actually, and had been calling us all week to get a tape before anybody else, which we said no to, but we had arranged for a courier to knock on his door, like, midnight or whatever the time it was in Paris, and, he could watch the film the same time everybody else in the industry was.
Well, being a little time difference, Harvey got the film a few hours earlier and saw the film. He just calls me up and said, "This is fantastic. This film's fantastic. You got it. Where's Larry Meistrich?" And I said, "Well, he's in LA." He goes like, "What hotel's he staying at?" I said, "I don't know." And he goes like, "You don't know?" And, after taking my requisite tongue lashing, we located Larry Meistrich. And I was like, well, what would take it off the table? He goes like, $10 million, at which we both chuckled. We both were like, yeah, okay, great, Larry.
And then Harvey called us in the middle of our LA screening. It's like, it's an American classic. I have to have the film. And he paid the highest price ever paid at the time for an acquisition.
It turns out Harvey said, okay, $10 million, I'll take it off the table. And everybody, then the LA screening got out a couple hours later due to the time difference. And the whole acquisition community was like freaking out. They were just like, couldn't believe they had been trumped.
I like Q-Less on a beach. I hate him.
Harvey wrote another $10 million check for the film Happy Texas. This time the result was catastrophic, barely grossing $2 million.
Harvey just took over the independent film scene, overpaid for a lot of films, pumped up the price. Other distributors couldn't keep up. It was great for independent filmmakers. Ultimately, however, it inflated the budgets of independent films.
There was a terrible crisis of inflation. It was a whole decade of growth and then excess growth, and it's like ripening leads to rot. You can't get overripe. But the true ultimate manifestation of that was the spate of studio specialty divisions.
There was a period when that whole independent distribution sector exploded, when every studio decided to have a boutique operation. So, Sony, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox, they kind of all got into this business.
In the 90s, a lot of companies sprouted up that thought that they knew the formula, the magic formula, to emulating the success that Miramax had.
What it did was it enforced them to innovate. So what do you do to get out of that competition and to move yourself up in the food chain?
Ultimately, he turned to production.
As Miramax evolved from an acquisitions company to a producing company, the question was, Harvey may have been very skilled in acquisitions, but can he produce from scratch?
Now to Quentin Tarantino, who's made quite the most remarkable arrival on the movie scene for many a year.
Pulp Fiction is the uncompromising new release from director Quentin Tarantino, the man who made his name with the extremely violent Reservoir Dogs.
In 1992, Miramax picked up Tarantino's first film, Reservoir Dogs.
Reservoir Dogs grossed maybe like $1.9 million, which, respectable, but not the obvious precursor to Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction is remembered as a commercial film, but really it was an art and specialty movie that broke loose.
Pulp Fiction was the first really sort of pure independent film that crossed $100 million. So that was really the year to get on the scoreboard.
It was that moment in filmmaking, the independent movement, suddenly having a star in Tarantino, it caught everyone's attention.
Harvey always refers to Miramax as the house that Quentin built.
Harvey knew that he had a filmmaker to kind of build a franchise around. And what Quentin wanted, Quentin was able to get in a way that other filmmakers, you know, that didn't have the wherewithal to drive out of Harvey in a deal. But, it worked well both ways.
Tarantino would help define Harvey as the ultimate indie talent spotter, and in return, Miramax gave Tarantino a blank check and creative autonomy to make films such as Jackie Brown, Kill Bill, and Kill Bill 2.
The Palme d'Or goes to Pulp Fiction.
Pulp Fiction went on to win the Palme d'Or and break indie records by grossing over $200 million worldwide and earn Miramax 7 Oscar nominations and the Oscar for Best Screenplay.
Independence Day led Hollywood's effects-laden blockbusters to the top of the box office in 1996. But an independent assault of a more subtle nature has taken place in the movie business. Stop playing! Independent films have come of age.
The English Patient was exciting because it was the first film for them that really looked big budget.
New lovers are nervous and tender, but smash everything. For their heart is an organ of fire.
This was different. He had a whole different relationship with that film. Harvey was just absolutely so in love with this film.
It touched people. It was a beautiful love story. It was filmmaking in an epic style. We haven't seen things like this since Bridge Over the River Kwai or Lawrence of Arabia. It's about time we make some more of them.
All told, Miramax invested a record $30 million in The English Patient. It grossed $78 million and won 9 Oscars. Despite a positive spin in public, Harvey bitterly fought with director Anthony Minghella and famed producer Saul Zaentz.
Miramax became our godfathers.
Unlikely guardian angels, but
Yes.
guardian angels they were. They've been wonderful to
Yes.
us all the way through this.
Zaentz claimed he was cheated out of millions of profits, while Harvey claimed the film was not profitable due to high marketing costs.
In 1997, when I was at the Hollywood Reporter, we put together a piece examining the profit participation on The English Patient. We did a thorough examination of how money was flowing in from on-the-record and off-the-record sources, and Harvey didn't like the story. He ultimately entered the field of journalism and wrote a first-person piece for Premiere Magazine, blasting this story as an example of unscrupulous journalists who use off-the-record sources. So he didn't back down at all.
Zaentz publicly said, "I will never work with Miramax again. Harvey is a pushcart peddler who puts his thumb on the scale when the old woman is buying meat." Another accounting question mark was Good Will Hunting, a part of Hollywood history as it launched the Miramax rep players Matt Damon and Ben Affleck with a film that grossed over $200 million on a budget of $20 million.
I think we'll probably be working for Harvey Weinstein for the next 30, 40 years.
I also think in order to get the movie made, we did have to sign away our first 3 children. So, it'll be a while.
Like Saul Zaentz, Damon and Affleck felt cheated out of millions for a film they had written and developed, as compared to co-star Robin Williams, who was slated to make over $20 million.
Harvey paid them virtually nothing to do the movie and made over $100 million on it and didn't give them anything. Finally, the two of them shamed him and blackmailed him. They wouldn't sign up for a Kevin Smith film until he gave them some money. And as a joke, he brought a garbage bag full of fake money and dumped it on the bed and said, "Here's your money." But he did give them checks for $1 million each. And he could have given them $5 million each and still made off like a bandit.
Feeling invincible, Harvey was not only earning himself a reputation for his relentless personality, but as Harvey Scissorhands as a result of his growing habit of taking a director's work and recutting it.
Thomas Jefferson once said about another politician that he had a carnivore's appetite for publicity. And I always thought that Harvey had a carnivorous appetite for dismembering his films.
In the beginning, he had film students fresh out of film school cutting films of famous directors. One director told me he was at the dentist having his teeth drilled, and Harvey called him to bug him about cutting his movie. And, you know, the question is, which was worse, Harvey on the phone, you know, or getting your teeth drilled?
When we were making Factory Girl, Harvey wants to reshoot, and one of the things he wants to reshoot is the sex scene between Edie and Bob Dylan, between Sienna and Hayden. All right, so Hayden, Sienna, it's gonna be sexy. What you're gonna do is you're gonna hump her and hump her and hump her and hump her, and then you're gonna flip her over and do her the other way. And his eyes are lighting up. And then he said, and then you're gonna get on top of him, and there's gonna be a tear, and the whole audience is gonna tear with you. That's what it's gonna be like. Now, Hickenlooper, storyboard this fucker.
We were making Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, and we had a screening. He wanted us to do things to the film, and we didn't want to do it. And he started raving and ranting and charging around the room, and then Ismail jumped up. And Ismail had a very heavy briefcase, which he sort of flung against there was a glass partition there, kind of curved partition. And Ismail flung that against that, and there was a cracking sound, and he damaged it in some kind of way. And then they were actually going to go and fight in the street.
When we wrapped, Harvey wanted me to call him instantly. He goes, how did it go? What did it look like? What was it like? So he arranged to have the video playback sent to his house immediately. And he goes, Hickenlooper, you're a fucking idiot. Loser. Loser. You're a loser. In fact, I'm going to take out a full-page ad in Variety tomorrow that says, Hickenlooper is a loser, and don't ever hire him for anything, because he's a fucking idiot. And he hung up on me. I'm like, Jesus Christ, what did I do? What did I do? What happened? What went wrong? I thought we had these storyboards.
Paul Newman loved the film. And he told Harvey that that's the film I'm going to do publicity for, and no other version of it. And that was that. And that quieted Harvey down.
So he finally calls me back a couple hours later, and I'm sweating, and he goes, what the fuck were you thinking? Where's my wide shot? Where's my wide shot? Where's my wide shot? And I said, well, Harvey, we were shooting in a cabin that was 12 feet by, I couldn't use anything wider than a 40mm lens. You're lying to me. You're lying to Harvey Weinstein. I'm going to take out another ad in Variety that says George Hickenlooper is a liar and lies to Harvey Weinstein. No one's ever going to hire you. Click. I remember we were arguing over the opening of the picture, and Harvey threw me out of the cutting room. He was, get out of here. You're fired. You're done. Out of here. So I was like, okay, well, I'm fired. At least I'm eating my free lunch that just arrived. So I'm sitting there eating my lunch, and like 5 minutes later, he goes, get back the fuck in here. So I was fired and rehired and fired.
I had a great experience with Julie Taymor, and Frida was a hell of a good movie. But that was a very, very tough, sort of bombastic relationship between her and Harvey.
This was a screening, and Harvey didn't like it. And so Harvey came out and saw her in the lobby by the popcorn stand and just started screaming at her. I mean, just screaming. I mean, physically menacing. I mean, she felt physically menaced. And she probably was, by the way.
Harvey, for all his legendary taste and intuition, would often zero in on exactly the sequence that defined, in a film that defined the voice of the filmmaker. When Harvey acquired Reservoir Dogs, Harvey wanted to cut the ear-slicing scene, the Echt Quentin Tarantino scene. He told Quentin that this is the difference between, you know, a $20 million movie and an $80 million movie. Everyone will go to see this movie if you cut that scene. And Quentin's reaction, to his credit, was, well, I made this movie for myself, and nobody else is invited. And Quentin said that defined his relationship with Harvey for all his future films.
Very often, filmmakers, especially in their first film, make films. They take it to a festival. Festival audiences love it because they love almost everything at festivals. The light of day after the festival, and the film needs work.
Here's the great irony of it. Harvey has a cut of Frida that's 9 minutes shorter. It's better. It's definitely better.
We had negotiated for final cut that he couldn't cut the film. So what they had done was they had secretly cut it and then showed it to us. And it was better. But Billy was like, nah, I have final cut, and that's the deal. And, you know, there was several heated confrontations. Ultimately, we did listen to Harvey, and, you know, Billy walked home with an Oscar. And look, the guy cutting behind our back was Walter Murch. So it wasn't like, you know, there was some hack in a back room carving up our movie. It was, you know, arguably one of the better editors ever. fixing, you know, a first-time filmmaker's in Billy's work.
You know, you get this question, should directors have final cut? I mean, do I have final cut on a piece I write for the New Yorker or a book? I mean, I have an editor that basically is making it better. And Harvey, I think, made movies better.
Inspired by the studio moguls of an era long past, Harvey began to package actors and directors for films that he would work with again and again. The list included Kevin Smith, whose low-budget film Clerks was an early hit for Miramax in 1994.
What is it about Kevin Smith?
Well, I think he's one of the most brilliant, innovative new writers there is. He's got a great comedic style. He was responsible for Miramax getting Good Will Hunting. You know, this is a new mafia of young filmmakers and young actors.
When I first started, it was Bridget Fonda who was in a bunch of the movies. Later, Gwyneth Paltrow, Matt and Ben. As much as Harvey could be contentious or sometimes difficult to work with, there's this ample evidence that filmmaker relationships that would continue movie after movie after movie were part of what he was after.
People like Gwyneth Paltrow were just devoted to him and had done movies with him and wanted to do more. He had a gift for making actors and directors feel like they were artists. And that's a gift that a lot of studio people don't have.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Someone is playing a deadly game.
Flush with cash, Miramax launched its Dimension Films label that would ultimately become the financial backbone of the business.
Very often, businesses work because they're partnerships.
Silent partner and brother Bob runs Dimension Films, the genre that produces teen blockbusters like Scream 2.
Bob, he's been tasked with the Dimension part of it, the low culture stuff, which audiences love, while his brother, Harvey, was tasked with the high culture stuff.
Bob is never given as much credit as he probably deserves for his creative chops, which are considerable. And Bob is a good bit more, you know, fiscally conservative and a little bit more careful in that regard.
Those films hit a different demographic. They're in over 3,000 screens. They sort of explode on the marketplace.
Bob became the money spinner with the genre horror action films, and Harvey spent all of the profits.
Bob is a little bit less inclined to do 30 movies all at once. He was more interested in taking a few films and trying to do a better job with them, which is why some years Dimension carried the company.
While Bob was making a killing at the box office, Harvey was looking for Oscars.
Sunday evening, late March, a red carpet, a gold statuette.
It seems that you are drawn to the flame of the Academy Awards, that somehow you look at a picture early on and say, this is an Academy picture, and that somehow attracts your inner self more than even the economics.
It is the economics.
Before he came along, the idea of campaigning was that it was somehow not respectable. He made it eminently respectable and a winning strategy.
Harvey understood how to, before the internet, how to create a viral campaign.
They actually understood that every vote counted, that you could lose by one vote, which means you could win by one vote.
No vote was too insignificant for Harvey to go after. So if people took their Christmas vacation in Aspen, Harvey would have screenings in Aspen. If they were retired and lived in the motion picture home, Harvey would have screenings in the motion picture home. The idea was to get these films a lot of circulation within the industry, you know, and sending out screeners was a huge asset. And that started around the time that Miramax initiated these campaigns.
The reason we innovated on the cassettes was, you know, we're sitting there with like no money, no budget, no anything, and we say, wow, if the movie gets a Best Picture nomination, we're going to do a lot of gross on this. So we use the Oscars as a marketing platform.
His strategy was really to take an underdog picture and to create excitement for it. You take ads, you throw some parties, you organize speeches, you organize Q&As, You really take your filmmaker and put him on tour.
You know, Benigni for Life is Beautiful essentially moved to Hollywood during Oscar season.
Thank you for your kindness. I am so happy. When you need me, I come.
Oscars are, let's be real, a popularity contest. So for somebody to win and to come from the independent means that they cracked that popularity thing.
It's really all about the movies. That's what it's about.
He never, took no for an answer. He was a relentless force of nature, in your face all the time. Oscar campaigns were never the same after Harvey. They really weren't.
In 1998, Harvey was at the height of his power. He went on an all-out, calculated and military-like attack to win Best Picture for his film Shakespeare in Love.
Well, you know, they were competing with DreamWorks, who had Private Ryan that year. And Private Ryan was favored, at least initially.
Saving Private Ryan versus Shakespeare in Love, the frontrunner versus the dark horse, DreamWorks versus Miramax.
There's no question DreamWorks did sort of the plain vanilla job, and we did the chocolate sundae with the extra nuts and the cherry. So we did kind of go all out on the marketing campaign.
Harvey just kind of blasted through with a campaign that was second to none. He ratcheted it up to a level that those guys just weren't used to dealing with.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Harrison Ford.
It was all set up as a coronation, right? It was going to be Harrison Ford giving the award to his best friend, Steven Spielberg, who had made many movies together, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, the coronation didn't work. There was an abdication in the middle of it, or a coup d'etat.
And the Oscar goes to Shakespeare in Love.
I can remember the unbelievable excitement, everybody involved with it, and running to the stage and the subsequent controversy of Harvey being up there and all of that. It had that sense that here is this unusual independent film that has risen to the top. Everybody loved it, particularly those people involved with the Academy. And as good as Saving Private Ryan was, there was something about it that maybe was familiar with being a studio film. It wasn't an underdog. You know, people in the film community love those underdogs.
That was a huge shock to the entire industry because, Steven Spielberg, Oscar director par excellence, the golden boy of Hollywood, and this was a British film. It was clearly an indie film. So it was, David Goliath in every kind of way. And I think Harvey relished the fact that he was always the David, and that here was this Goliath.
Here he is. Exactly words.
This was an ensemble film, and it took an ensemble team to make it.
You know, it was quite a moment, and when you look back and you look at Shakespeare in Love, pretty good movie, decent, but something that would knock down Saving Private Ryan, which had all the momentum, all the love. That's when people really started to think maybe there's something to his dark arts that we do not understand.
This is a movie about life and art and life combining is called magic.
You know, he took it a step further. And in some cases, I think he went beyond it, attacking other pictures, which I think got a lot of resentment.
Especially in Oscar campaigns, Harvey has turned into the boogeyman. If there's something going on, people say, I'm sure Harvey's behind it.
Some detractors have reportedly accused Miramax of even bad-mouthing the competition, most notably Saving Private Ryan with influential reporters.
I mean, it's always been sort of a Super Bowl played in ball gowns, but he's the one who turned it into a much higher contact sport.
We spend less than any studio. It's really the quality of film. The Academy Awards is 6,000 professionals. There's no way to fool them.
The Academy is a little inside club, as we all know, but the awards resonate throughout the world. So it's business, it's big business, and they identified it, they went after it. And everyone, there were those people who criticized it and stood on the sidelines, but those people are all on board now.
The house is stirring. It is a new day. It is a new world.
When you win the Oscar and you win it, multiple times, you've kind of arrived. What else is there to just kind of go on repeating yourself? He's a very curious man, obviously. He's restless. He's not prepared to sit on his laurels. He obviously, the film industry was not enough for him.
He's a man with a lot of interests, and he is a famous guy in New York. He is part of the action. And there were so many things that attracted his attention. Politics, the DVD business, Wall Street, finance, the fashion business.
Harvey was clearly looking to build an empire. He invested in fashion house Halston, cable network Ovation, a long list of restaurants, the successful Bravo hit Project Runway, and dozens of Broadway productions.
August Osage County, Boing Boing is ours, and Mamma Mia on Broadway is ours, not the movie.
Not many new magazines are launched like this.
I've never seen such a plethora of talented people.
Nearly 1,000 people from the entertainment, media, political, fashion, and literary worlds gathered on Liberty Island for the launch of Talk. Talk is a joint venture with the Hearst Corporation and Miramax Films.
In 1998, Harvey decided that if he could not control the stories, he would publish them. He hired New Yorker and former Vanity Fair editor Tina Brown to launch a new magazine called Talk and a Talk book division.
I think he saw a synergy between all of those various interests, as many people did at this stage of the game. So I think he was looking like any other entrepreneur who was a big, big picture thinker into what was next.
You have to understand that Harvey is the king of New York, and the nexus of New York is finance, politics, power, not necessarily independent filmmaking. So, yeah, instead of hanging out with Matt Damon, he wants to hang out with Hillary Clinton.
Am I lucky?
Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars.
He became a strong supporter of Bill Clinton and supported the Senate campaigns of Charles Schumer and then Hillary Clinton in 2000. And between 1998 and 2002, Weinstein would personally donate $750,000 and successfully fundraise $14 million more.
There's no question that Harvey was very interested in an empire, was fascinated by it, loved the idea of it, and I think what he found out is there is such a thing as being stretched too thin, even for Harvey Weinstein.
I could do what the studios do all day long in my sleep.
Harvey became caught up in his own celebrity to a degree. So arguably he missed out on a number of independent pictures which, had he been more focused, he could have climbed onto.
But if you look like a star, then maybe you are there for the world to see.
5 years after selling Miramax to Disney, Harvey had now lost focus. Numerous successful indie films were released by other distributors who had been using the Miramax formula and leaving Miramax without a hit.
Being a media mogul was never a core expertise of him. He's a movie guy, and I think that when you're distracted by all these different endeavors, a film can't speak to you the same way when you just sit in the dark and look at it and only it.
In film, the competition is so major that if you take your eye off the ball of film to attend to other activities, you suffer maybe disproportionately than if you're running a widget factory and you take your eye off the widget factory in order to pay attention to your new retail enterprise.
By 2002, Miramax was feeling the heat. Talk magazine was forced to shut down after losing an estimated $50 million. Harvey also laid off 15% of his staff. His relationship with Disney was feeling strained, especially after Katzenberg, a Harvey ally, had left, leaving Weinstein to deal with the less pliable Michael Eisner.
The chemistry between Harvey and Eisner was definitely toxic.
It's absolutely the case that without Katzenberg it got trickier, because then you're dealing with people who just viewed Harvey as a burden. You know, Jeffrey Katzenberg half enjoyed the antics, and most people in Hollywood didn't enjoy the antics at all. They viewed them as an imposition on their day and as bad form.
At the end of the day, the relationship between Harvey and Michael was probably the problematic thing that caused it to all break down.
After media mogul Ted Turner paid $500 million for indie distributor New Line Cinema, Harvey felt that he had undersold Miramax. Harvey would even ask Michael Eisner if he could buy back Miramax. The answer was no. All is not well in the wonderful world of Disney. In fact, things are looking quite awful.
The Disney relationship was sort of endlessly complicated. You know, Harvey and Bob always thought that they could run Disney better than Disney did.
I can't imagine trying to control somebody like Harvey. He doesn't work well within bureaucracies, beholden to shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. That just was not in his nature.
When you try and rein Harvey in, he acts like an artist. You're treating me like a businessman, I'm an artist. And they say, no, 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 you're a businessman. I mean, you know, you have to control your costs more. And it just put them at each other's throats.
Harvey would do things like he would schedule Miramax releases against Disney releases. You know, he acted as if he had no relationship to Disney. And the Disney people, quite from their point of view, quite rightly felt that Miramax was a parasite on their company.
Tensions with Disney would continue to grow as Harvey picked up a series of controversial films.
Virgin. I love him.
I knew you fucked it, man. I sat here for like 2 hours and shit. That girl was 12. You hit that shit up.
Nobody is claiming that the new film Kids is pleasant.
They was trying to bring you into a reality that grown-ups just don't see. It's like eavesdropping on this world. Think about what it's like to be a kid, you know?
They went ahead and bought Kids, even though, you know, though they knew it would probably lead to trouble with the parent company. But I get the feeling that biting the hand that feeds was something that Harvey probably took some joy out of.
The film's original distributor, Miramax, fought a losing battle to get the Motion Picture Association of America to give Kids the R rating. Miramax is now owned by Disney, which won't allow the release of an NC-17 film. So the founders and original owners of Miramax bought the movie back and set up a new independent company so it could release Kids without a rating.
This is a film about rape. This is a film about drug-induced stupors and sexual irresponsibility. This is a film about emotional exploitation of young women by predatory young men.
So that's your new girl, huh?
I hope so for now.
You like them kind of young, right? Fucking babies.
I like them new, not like you.
You know, there was all allegations of child pornography, and we had very, you know, a coterie of legal experts who were, you know, advising us at every step of the game. It was the apex of their, like, seeking out controversy and hopefully benefiting from it.
I was at the screening with Harvey when we first, you know, saw the film. He was genuinely taken with the filmmaking, the idea that it was a New York movie. There was a real message that heterosexual kids need to kind of be aware of safe sex. And so it wasn't just a case of, oh, let's put this in the face of the corporate bosses. This is one that we can, you know, exploit.
Don't just hang there, you smug-idle bastard! Do something!
The movie Priest, which profiled a gay Catholic priest, triggered waves of protest by the Catholic League, which called for boycotts and stockholder revolts against Disney, parent company of distributor Miramax Films.
Harvey was going to release Priest on Good Friday, and the right-wing Catholic groups just came down on Miramax and Disney like a ton of bricks.
That's different than what happened with Kids. That was really like a, let's put this in their face and, you know, stir things up.
It's offensive to God, it's offensive to the Blessed Virgin Mary, it's offensive to the Catholic Church.
Disney couldn't deal with the pressure, you know, the threats of boycotts, the picketing at Disney World. So Miramax backed off those kinds of movies. It was another step towards the mainstream.
It was an interesting moment because it was an indication that it was a bit of a poison gift to have sold oneself, one's company, one's brand, to a corporation that really had thresholds.
The lesson for Miramax was, why should we make controversial films like Kids and Priest that just piss everybody off, when we can make innocuous films like costume dramas like Shakespeare in Love and win Best Picture Oscars? So, you know, it's like a no-brainer.
Harvey was banking that his next production would erase any doubt about his golden touch. The film was Gangs of New York. Directed by Martin Scorsese, it was easily Harvey's most expensive film with a budget of $90 million.
Harvey, I think, felt like he wanted to stretch and move up in the world and went off and made several of these, you know, enormously expensive movies. And that's a mistake that almost every independent has made to their detriment.
I think of Miramax as a production company, again, taking chances on subject matter
and filmmakers that nobody else would. And I think in that case, in doing so, regenerating American cinema constantly, taking chances. Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't.
Miramax expects its fortunes to improve this year with the release of several films, including the long-awaited Martin Scorsese epic, Gangs of New York.
Hold sway over the 5 points.
Take one legendary film director and one studio boss, not exactly renowned as a shy and tiring type. The explosive result, ladies and gentlemen, is the saga that has been Gangs of New York.
Scorsese, when I interviewed him, said nothing but nice things about Harvey. But I knew if he lifted his shirt, I would see scars.
I heard that a phone went flying out the window, and not like a little cell phone, but like a big old rotary phone. He said, yeah, that might have happened.
Miramax provided the cash, with boss Harvey Weinstein overseeing shooting in Italy. But tempers allegedly got frayed as budgets spiraled and filming dragged on and on.
They weren't really, it was blown up to be a lot more than it was, to tell you the truth. They were very supportive of him, very.
After 6 months recreating the most bloody, mean street fighting ever witnessed in America and another year-long personal battle in the edit suites for Mr. Scorsese, this gang came to Cannes to scrap with the press over tales of squabbles on set and in post-production.
And this whole story is totally exaggerated.
5, 6, 7, 8.
If Gangs of New York was only a modest success, Harvey would turn Chicago into a massive hit. The film would become Miramax's highest-grossing film ever, when its domestic box office hit $171 million. It went on to win 6 Oscars, including Best Picture. With Chicago, Harvey dodged a bullet, and it seemed like he was back on top. Following the enormous success of Chicago and a mysterious health scare that hospitalized Harvey, he separated from his wife of 18 years. The same year Chicago cleaned up, controversial documentary filmmaker Michael Moore had won an Oscar for Bowling for Columbine. The $4 million film had scored well and grossed $21 million, easily Moore's biggest hit. Harvey quickly signed Moore for his next film, the wildly controversial Fahrenheit 9/11.
Fahrenheit 9/11 was a great project to work on because we were told to lock the doors, change the name of the drive on which the project was, and work behind lock and key. Because the media was all over Disney and they were saying, we don't have anything to do with that Michael Moore.
Disney is currently blocking its Miramax Films division from distributing Moore's documentary Fahrenheit 9/11.
Moore's new film criticizes President Bush's handling of 9/11 and the Bush family's ties with the family of Osama bin Laden.
Michael Moore walks into your office sometime in the past and pitches you this project. Did you foresee the firestorm inside the international conglomerate you're a part of?
Honestly, no. No, I did not.
Michael Eisner, the head of Disney, told my agent face-to-face, I will never release this film. I heard it was because they were afraid of losing millions of dollars of tax breaks and incentives by angering Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida, where Disney has a lot of their investment.
Miramax's Harvey Weinstein and his brother Bob are unlikely to give in easily. This row is the latest and potentially one of the most explosive in a relationship troubled from the outset.
Harvey gave in to the enormous pressure and bought the film back from Disney and released it through Lionsgate. The $6 million film went on to win the Palme d'Or in Cannes and gross over $100 million in 2004.
Thank you, and I hope you see me again.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Their core values are being rebels. And so having to be, indoctrinated into the great world of corporate filmmaking, they chafed at that. But they're pretty good at planning ahead, They stay on their feet, and I think they probably used Fahrenheit 9/11 as a great exit strategy.
Harvey was now telling everyone that he would be gone from Disney within 6 months, leaving behind his beloved Miramax. He was now 52, the same age that his father was when he died of a heart attack.
The relationship with Disney, what is going to happen there?
Or can you put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
I'm sure, you know what I mean, knowing Disney and Miramax and, you know, the two amicable sorts that we are, you know, Michael and I will just come, you know what I mean, you know, probably sing like a happy song together, and, you know, it'll all end up peacefully like one of those animated movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I hope it's not Bambi where somebody gets killed.
The big question now was whether Disney would renew Harvey and Bob's employment agreements. After all, Miramax had been hugely successful for Disney. But Eisner disagreed, citing that Miramax had not been profitable in the last few years.
I'd be more than happy to work out everything amicably with them, and if we have the right situation, stay at the company. So I don't want my ego to get in the way.
Harvey wanted money. He wanted to be able to make big movies, not just the small independent movies. And he coveted Disney's deep pockets so that he could be the impresario he longs to be, but someone else footing the bill. And ultimately, that's what drove Disney and Michael Eisner crazy, that they were signing too many checks.
You know, we said at the time it was only going to work if we put Harvey in a box where he could operate and be Harvey, but couldn't, you know, cross the line and break the bank. It was only when the executives at Disney began to sleep at their post a little bit with Harvey, and the walls of that box began to break down, that it kind of went maybe in the other direction.
What do you think accounts for all this drama? Those facts are, if they're
I
irrefutable.
probably account for the drama.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I should probably retire me somewhere and let Bob, you know, just do it, you know, make oodles of money, and they can all just make oodles of money somewhere.
On the impending split with Disney, Quentin Tarantino said, "Bob and Harvey don't need those fucking guys. I've been waiting for this day forever." On March 30th, 2005, Disney announced that they would not be renewing their contract with the Weinsteins. Harvey ranted, "We have 75 Oscars, $2 billion in assets, and hundreds of millions in profits, and still Michael Eisner won't renew my contract."
They parted ways for reasons that were probably a multitude of reasons. Harvey's overspending, Harvey's got too political, Disney not release Fahrenheit 9/11.
The idea that they even stayed together as long as they did was, I think, extraordinary. I don't know how the Disney guys ever thought it would work. Did they have, you know, a trank gun? They thought they were going to take them down at key junctures? Who knows?
The Weinstein brothers left Disney without their beloved Miramax. The company named after his parents that Harvey had taken from fledgling independent to blockbuster powerhouse would now be in the hands of someone else.
They lived and died for that name and that company for such a long period of time. It must just kill them.
You know, we're all conflicted. We all want to be respectful. And at the same time, you know, I guess life must go on to some degree.
Scott Fitzgerald said there are no second acts in American lives. Well, he hadn't met Harvey Weinstein.
There's so many people that sit like crows on a wire and wait for Harvey to tumble so they can come, come flying off and pick it. I think they're going to be waiting for a long, long time. This is a guy who's able to access capital, able to access talent. What else do you really need to keep making movies?
You're talking about two guys who had, from nothing, had created a company that was worth a couple of $1 billion. And that was noticed in the investment community.
Harvey's famed golden touch sent a message that even without Miramax, he did have a future. His track record, along with his stable of actors and directors, were still highly valued commodities. So in 2005, Harvey and Bob partnered with Goldman Sachs and two other financiers and launched the Weinstein Company, with a foundation of $500 million in equity and $500 million in scrutinized debt.
Well, Miramax, unfortunately, we don't have the name, but I think with directors like Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Anthony Minghella, John Madden, Marty Scorsese, all coming with the new company, it's sort of the ongoing business. And if anybody can come up with a better name than the Weinstein Company, we're all ears.
Nothing's better than the Weinstein brothers, so the name is great.
After they gave Miramax away to Disney, everybody says that Harvey, lost his mojo. Probably not true. I mean, in many respects, it probably put new fire into them. I mean, they pretty much knew that they were outsiders once again, and that's where they started.
The timing seemed perfect for the Weinsteins. Box office and DVD sales were soaring. There was an industry-wide rush to control content. Goldman projected revenues for the new Weinstein Company to be $500 million in 2006, $1 billion in 2007, and close to $2 billion in 2010, despite very clearly articulated threats in their prospectus.
Goldman Sachs, who in their portfolio, I'm sure had, technology companies that had uses for content and, hardware companies that had uses for content, and you have one of the greatest content providers in a long time. So you could see why an investment is made.
But the next 2 years of the Weinstein Company were hardly successful. Instead of focusing on film, Harvey tried to be the next Rupert Murdoch and made investments in internet, cable, and fashion.
I never understand why big money does business with him, because he does whatever he wants, when he wants. And I don't think long run Harvey's partners have made out that well. And I don't know how people hypnotize themselves into thinking this time it will be different.
With his obsession growing with the fashion industry, Harvey would marry British designer Georgina Chapman and help her finance her clothing line, Marchesa. Using his influence, Harvey ensured that many Oscar contenders were wearing his wife's designs. A year later, Georgina would give Harvey his fourth daughter, a baby girl named India. As acquisitions for the new Weinstein Company piled up, box office plummeted. A series of films, even ones from his famed stable of stars, failed to deliver the old Miramax magic. Even Michael Moore's Sicko was a mediocre success, despite the spin Harvey put on it.
Harvey, this is not a date movie. Healthcare is not a sexy subject. How do you market a movie of this sort? It's about to come out.
I think that the controversy, will pique a lot of people's interest. The reviews have been unanimous. I mean, I've worked with Michael for a while now. These are the best reviews I think Michael's, ever had, and he's had superb reviews.
And expectations were high for Grindhouse, a double feature made by two of Harvey's star directors, Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino.
The movie kicked ass, and it is a Quentin Tarantino movie, which is what I've always wanted, and I think the world wants it too, and the world wants to see a Robert Rodriguez movie. So I think we're ready to rumble.
But despite its high-profile marketing push and a budget of $83 million, Grindhouse grossed only $25 million. Worse, the market was changing. Box office revenues were softening. DVD sales were starting to tumble, and cable networks like Showtime were now investing in their own original programming instead of purchasing films from the Weinstein Company. Gone was another source of revenue.
They probably picked the worst time in the history of the film business to start a new film studio. They launched their new company in an environment, even pre-recession, where the foreign markets were beginning to contract a little bit, where DVD was maturing, where the TV markets were contracting. And so the mistakes that were easily forgiven because of all the heady growth 15 years before weren't forgiven anymore.
In the last 10 years, all the rules that were in place for most of the 20th century are being rewritten in terms of video on demand and streaming. The way audiences see movies, the way they relate to movies.
You don't need to go to a theater now to see 400 Blows. You can get it on demand, or you can Netflix it, or you can instant download to your television.
It's like Vegas. The house always wins, and it grinds you down. I think you're seeing the Weinstein Company, with good intentions, getting just ground down by the house, because the house has changed all the gambling games.
It was always show business, with show coming first and business coming second. It's now business show. The war between the bankers and the artists was lost by the artist.
By 2009, Harvey was in trouble. The The Weinstein Company had released 70 films in 4 years, and 25% of them had failed to make $1 million at the box office. 13 of them took in less than $100,000. Kevin Smith said publicly that Harvey had impeccable taste when he was hungry. The problem, according to Smith, was that Harvey isn't hungry anymore. He is starving and desperate.
People have been saying to me, you better write the story. Weinstein Company is about to go under. You could be on top of that story. And for 2 years, the Weinstein Company has not gone under. And I'm still getting pitches like that, but he always survives. I always say, you know, don't count him out.
It isn't that he's just telling a story of rebirth, he's doing it after just colossal errors. I mean, 9 was a bad idea. It was a bad idea, poorly executed. And he stayed on it and rode that horse all the way to the ground. And then when it was dead, he got up and all of a sudden, Inglourious Basterds rears to life. And what many saw as a fun early season movie all of a sudden was in the thick of the Oscar race. Pretty good piece of work, I gotta say.
At the 11th hour, he decided to swoop in and try to stir some excitement for Inglourious Basterds. And he got a lot of press and got a lot of newsmen and bloggers speculating as to whether the Tarantino picture couldn't emerge as a dark horse. Even then, at the 11th hour, he brought a lot of energy to what was a very boring Oscar race.
Although it ultimately lost out to The Hurt Locker, Tarantino's long-awaited Inglourious Basterds would go on to earn an outstanding worldwide gross of $313 million, a desperate reprieve and a record for the beleaguered Weinstein Company. In early 2010, Disney closed down Miramax and laid off 80 people and shelved many unreleased films. Harvey would wage a 10-month battle to furiously buy back the Miramax library and name from Disney.
For them, it's a legacy. It's something they started and probably walked away from with a heavy heart.
Mira and Max must be very happy.
Yeah, Miriam is still with us, and wherever Max is, he's probably up there smiling on us.
They believed that when you name a company after your parents' names or after a family name, you'll always succeed.
Miriam and Max. You know, that breaks my heart right there. Like, you gotta own the company that's called Miramax.
To buy back the library that he originally sold for $60 million to Disney, Harvey made an offer of $600 million. Disney rejected the offer. Ultimately, Disney would sell Miramax to a group of investors for a price reported to be $675 million. Saddled with mountainous debt, Harvey was forced to sell off more than half of his new Weinstein Company library.
I think their appetites got the better of them when they got the new company and just were kind of unfettered in being able to spend and do what they want. I think they just overextended themselves.
The proof is in the pudding. You see, since 2005, just how many films we've put out, and the consumer says, I never heard of that. What are these things? And you can't argue with the numbers.
It's a little scary, I gotta say, that somebody with a gut that good could go that cold.
I think with Harvey, I honestly don't know if he had his eye off the ball or if it was just a series of near misses or whatever. Again, I wish I had the answers to all this.
I think their best skill was acquiring. You know, they really did have great taste in sitting in a screening room at a film festival and picking the things that were going to work. Parlaying that into production, which has a whole other different risk level and cost level and, you know, skill set, you know, probably wasn't the best idea for those guys.
I don't think the Weinstein Company has excelled with any success. My feeling about Harvey is that his best act is behind him, and sometimes in life you really do need to know when to get off the stage.
Harvey helped independent filmmaking enormously. It's almost incalculable. But he also set it on a path that pushed it towards studio filmmaking. And it was one of those wrecked by success stories, and we're still feeling the effect of Miramax.
I think he took independent films out of a precious environment and, like, brought them out to the masses. Some of the downside of that is then independent films became more formulaic and became more, less idiosyncratic, to appeal to the masses.
By the time they were done with it, there was no independent film left. Harvey and Bob killed the independent film business. Harvey and Bob killed independent film.
I laugh at anyone who says Harvey ruined the independent business. Harvey brought energy, judgment, taste, money, distribution savvy, and expertise to a marketplace which frankly didn't have it at that point in time.
His legacy is not just his own movies, but it's this group of companies that he helped kind of spur on and were created kind of in Miramax's likeness that also did some pretty great things over the last 15 to 20 years.
I think that he'll be remembered as a guy who passionately understood that the audience looks for something beyond the summer blockbuster or the Christmas blockbuster. It looks for a little bit more in their movie than just an escape from their daily lives, that wants something that intrigues them, something that makes them think, something that makes them see the world in a different way. I think Harvey Weinstein brought that to people.
You know how you look back on that coach you hated when you were, like 12 because he beat up on you and broke your balls and didn't do it how you wanted to do it? That's how I kind of look back at Harvey. Could he have been more polite to us? Sure. Could he have been a different kind of communicator where it would have been less contentious? Sure. But the end of the process was he delivered us Oscars. He delivered us a massively successful film.
So what of Harvey Weinstein, the unapologetic dreamer, the man that is part Orson Welles and part Michael Corleone? Beyond the flops, there were unquestionably hundreds of films that were enormously successful. For 31 years, he championed films that would expose the depths of human emotion. Movies that were sometimes brilliant and pioneering. Films that Hollywood would never touch. From iconoclast to icon, Harvey is many things. Artist, tyrant, dreamer, and bully. But throughout his storied career, no one would accuse him of giving up. Not every film has a happy ending, but the story of Harvey Weinstein is far from over.
There's more room than ever for Harvey. And indeed, there's a need for Harvey in the business because the movie industry is turning into two distinct sectors. You have the blockbuster business, franchises, sequels, pictures that cost $150, $200 million. And then you have this other very forlorn business, which is underfunded, under-distributed, which consists of really the literature of cinema. Were Harvey to return to his main game, I think he'd find a bigger demand than ever.
Harvey loves to tell the story from the good and the bad and the ugly when Tuco's in the bathtub and the bad guys come in.
Now I find you in exactly the position that suits me.
And there he is naked in a bathtub, and just when they think they got him, up he comes with the revolvers. And he likes to think of himself as the underdog, as the guy that's pinned down. Maybe that's why getting as big as he did wasn't really good for him.
When you have to shoot, don't talk.
I mean, Harvey's not going anywhere. He will recreate himself.
Harvey made a career out of adapting to change. And so I think he'll do it again.
If he brings the money to the table, one way or the other, there's a third act.
That monumental period of success for them and what they created will help carry Harvey, into his third or fourth or fifth act.
I have a feeling there's going to be an Act 4 and an Act 5, and who knows, maybe even an Act 6. He'll outdo Shakespeare.
I don't know if he's done with Act 2. I don't know why we have to look at his life as a film. I think it's very, well, I guess because we are looking at film, right? You're right.
I'm hoping that if I do this interview, Harvey won't recognize me if I wear these, so if you don't mind.
I'm back in the New York groove. I'm back in the New York groove.
Okay, we've got everything we need to start a movie company. What are we gonna call it?
How about Paramount Pictures?
Already taken. Strap on your brain, Bob.
I got it. Metro Goldwyn Weinstein.
October Films.
Ugh, like that'll last.
Mom, Dad, don't move.
You guys are geniuses.
I know. Now shut up and eat your chicken soup.
And the rest is Miramax history.